thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Jimmy and the Future of Sound and to the Barbican. My name is Finlay Johnson. I'm the CEO for the Association for Electronic Music. We are a trade body that represents the best parts of culture and the business and the community of electronic music. And I suppose in some respects, the word trade body is maybe a very dry and boring word when you look at what's come before in the talks and the films, and it's very much an artist perspective. But I think there's a degree of beauty in culture, and I think there's a big question of whether culture just happens through free will or whether it is collectively shaped. And I sort of believe that it's collectively shaped. And we're viewing it today through the lens of people, power, and place. And I think when you start to impact those things, that really takes music out of being an individual experience, and you start to see the impact of it on a global scale, on a local scale in your own community. So we're joined today with people across sustainability, education, activism, and media. So if we could perhaps start by asking our guests to introduce themselves and the collective or organisation they belong to.
Hi everyone, thanks Finlay, thanks Jimmy for this event. It is so good to be at a gathering that is really about what music actually is in all of our lives and in our souls and in our hearts and in our bodies, and I really appreciate the curation and the intention behind this. So I'm Kathy, I'm the co-executive director of Earth%, and I guess we think about what we do at Earth% as being really making real this idea of the earth as an artistic collaborator in music, as a stakeholder in the music industry, and then as a beneficiary of music's incredible power. And in the work that we do with artists first and foremost, I think that really means working with artists and their music to help them be advocates for life on earth. And what we've just seen with Beatty is such an incredible example of that, and in fact that we worked with BT on the release of that first fossil fuel free vinyl release that BT and Michael Stipe worked on. Sam and Ayla are part of the Earth% community. So many artists here have done incredible work with Earth%, and I think what it's representing is really building this movement for the planet across music, led by artists who I think no longer feel that there has to be a identity separation between their work, their artistry, and their activism and their advocacy, but in fact that increasingly this is one thing. And in this, incredibly serious emergency that we face, I think the really important thing we feel is that artists first, the industry just needs to get its house in order, right? The job of the artist is not to deal with the sustainability of the music industry. That's the job of the music industry, right? And the answers are there, and it's not that hard. It's a question of fucking will. So we can just do that, right? Let's solve that one because it's not that hard. And what that really, really allows us to do is work with artists who are our greatest cultural advocates, who really can bring the stories that we need to hear to touch the hearts. Look what just happened to us in this room just now. Everybody was connected, and I really think that that's where our work is now. It's advocacy for life on earth. It's artists and music first. It's working with the industry who are, in fact, getting their act together and asking the industry to be there to support these artists and to support the music and support the messaging. And that's the movement that we've built. Thanks. Sorry for swearing.
Hi everyone, I am Rachel Almeida. I am the Deputy Editor of Resident Advisor. We are a global electronic platform about to reach 25 years in the industry and in editorial. And yeah, our whole mission is basically platforming, furthering and documenting electronic music culture from around the world.
Hi, I'm Emma Bartholomew. I'm here today as an ambassador of the global charity In Place of War. In Place of War uses music and the creative arts to try to bring about positive change in communities mainly across the global south, but also now closer to home. communities that are affected by conflict and climate change, which, as we all know, adversely and so disproportionately affects and impacts communities already impacted by conflict. It's a multi-layered thing, but we work with a community of about 130 plus change makers working on the ground in their own communities across around 30 countries. And it's just great to be in a room so full of consciousness today. So I really appreciate being here.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kerry. I'm here representing Bridges for Music. I'm on the Board of Trustees. I've had the pleasure of working with them for the last 5 years. I've been going for over 10 years. So Bridges for Music is a pioneering music academy that's in a small township in South Africa, in Cape Town, called Langa. And it does amazing work in terms of, helping, working, supporting music co-creators. We don't call them students, we call them co-creators. So from the development, whether it's production, DJing, singing, learning the business side of the music industry, it's second to none, and supported by some amazing companies in music like Resident Advisor and Alpha Theta, ADE. So phenomenal in terms of that side of things. But I think what makes Bridges for Music particularly different, it's a really holistic approach to music and education through music. And so mindfulness, yoga, mindset is a huge part of the curriculum, and it wouldn't be Bridges for Music with that. And when you're obviously working with young people in an environment such as, Langa, where, it can be a challenging environment, as we know. I'm sure you can understand what that can be like. Mindset is so important in terms of the future of, those young people thinking about how to approach life for themselves, opportunities for themselves, and how they can impact the communities and their families around them. And I think that really is a success of why now we're, these young people that are coming through the academy are, playing at Glastonbury and ADE and doing sort of phenomenal things. So I'm really excited to talk about what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think from the kind of range of experiences you just heard, you can see the intersectionality of how all those things link in, from co-creators to the environment that we live in, and then also the industry-facing side of things. And I think sometimes that is not looked at close enough. And then perhaps, Kathy, we could begin with you, because I think the model that you have is very interesting, and it's called Earth%. And maybe you could unpack a little bit about what your ask is of the industry, because I think you're approaching it from a very proactive, almost fiscal perspective, and like, where's the money? Put your money where your mouth is. Could you unpack a little bit about the response to that kind of quite bold ask?
Yeah, I mean, it was created as Earth% with this basic idea that, like, if we could redirect 1% of the resources of the music industry towards the planet, we could do a very collectively important thing for incredible organisations who are doing the real frontline work on the climate and nature emergencies. I think what we've realised over time is that when we ask artists to do that, to maybe pledge 1% of some area of activity of theirs, could be through their songwriting, recording, touring or merch, that's a beautiful thing to do. What it really is it's a sort of, badge of saying, I'm part of this movement, I'm here, I care, I belong. But like, we are clearly not asking artists to be not just the spokespeople, advocates, and creators, imaginers of a better world, and by the way, that they should be the ones to fund saving the planet. So we do that with artists because it is a way of creating this movement and everybody belonging. But when we work with the industry, we're trying to kind of go much deeper into the structures of the industry, and I guess try to make it creatively compelling and for there to be a great story about the ways in which the industry can support through redirecting resources as well. And so we've created initiatives like The Earth is Your Co-Writer, or made nature a recording artist through the Sounds Right initiative, which we work with the Museum for the UN and many other amazing partners on as a way of, I guess, kind of hacking the structures of the industry a little bit and saying, you know, here are these artists willing to lend their art and their creativity. What we need are structures that allow then that redirect of resources to happen from inside the industry. It's very different as a charity, as many people here would know, to go to people after they've earned money and say, hey, would you like to do something good for the planet? Could you just give us a little bit of something you've earned? What we want to do is say to the industry, bake these structures in, support us, help us make it possible, and accept your share in that. Let's again acknowledge that artists don't make the lion's share of the money that flows through the industry, so it has to be an equitable redistribution of that resource. And I think by doing these things, you know, nature as an artist, the earth as a co-writer, these are really culture-shifting innovations. They are great examples of using music's cultural power, having conversations that really cut through and not just saying, would you like to give some money to some great organisations? It's in the structures, and that means it's long term. It could be forever. There is no reason why suddenly nature should not be a recording artist, or people should not want to credit the earth if that's what they want to do. So but making that industry buy-in, asking the industry to make it possible. And just one tiny detail that's interesting is it's a kind of completely voluntary creative scheme, right? We understand that these things are both fiction and true all at once. Nature clearly is a musician. She's our oldest muse and musician in that sense. But we can't do this at the level of copyright. Nature is not allowed currently to own any copyright. So we are inviting the industry and artists by making it creatively compelling and a beautiful story to tell, to say, we all know it's a fiction, but let's make it happen. And we found there's been real willingness to do that.
And it creates passive income, I suppose, because every time you stream on Spotify, there's a piece of the publishing income that flows back. Is that correct?
Yeah, so with the nature as a recording artist, it's a share of the streaming royalties across all the platforms for these, through the Sounds Right initiative, where people credit nature as a collaborating artist, and through the Earth as co-writer, it flows through publishing income. So there are different routes. And then we have people pledging through touring or through merchandise or other parts, and many industry supporters who are simply saying, I'd like to support both Earth Percent's work, support the artists and support the organisations that you fund.
And Emma, I think Kathy spoke there about the artists being not just advocates but baked into it. How have you found that journey In Place of War when conflict can happen anywhere and you're asking artists to be involved? Like what is that journey like to get them to look inside themselves and talk about something other than their own artistic practice?
I think we always start with the acknowledgement of the fact that music is and always has been, despite what messaging is there's an attempt to circulate the theory that music shouldn't be political. Music has always been and always will be political in some way by its very nature. And so I think we normally would start by reaching out to activists, reaching out, that was a Freudian slip, reaching out to artists who are already kind of intrinsically activists in some form. But we would always encourage artists to connect with a cause, if we have to call it a cause, or a situation that they genuinely resonate with. It cannot be because something is trending. And I think that we all know that that's something that is always going to happen. But we find that artists often find us because they've been looking for a way that they can connect with a community more than just what's happening in one moment. Sadly, we live in a world where we're not getting any further away from conflict. It's constantly surrounding us, and in many places where it's forgotten. Sometimes we find that artists have learned about a particular situation that is close to their hearts, maybe for cultural reasons, maybe because of their own heritage. So I think that the connection has to be a genuine one, and then we build a conversation around that. Obviously, there is always going to be a risk for the artist that they alienate some of their following because audiences are divided. But we find that if you choose your cause carefully and you are an activist for the sake of belief, then those voices will die down, and the ones that don't die down are not necessarily resonating with your core. It's always going to be a difficult journey for them.
There's also the aspect, I think, that music as a artistic medium is kind of unique in its ability to bring people together. I'm not sure you could do what you do with, art or film necessarily, because it doesn't have that same unifying experience, do you think?
Yeah, I think, I'm always shouting this message that music is almost uniquely universal in the way that it crosses cultures, borders, languages, races, age, experience. And it really can cut through, even if people are resonating with a melody rather than a lyric in terms of activism. That's really powerful, and I do think it's almost unique in music. I think something like dance can do that as well because it's not a linguistic art form. But yeah, everybody in this room can understand the universal power of music. It's so important, and I think it's really important that we always remember, those of us who work in the commercial music industry as much as in music charities or non-profits, that what has music coursing through our veins is that universal language and its ability to bring us together as a community.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose, Kerry, coming to you, Emma and Kathy have spoken about where they go, where there's a global issue such as the environment and the earth, or in place of war where there's a conflict. And I suppose with Bridges, you have a place. You've come from a place and started in a place and you've expanded out of that. How is the location and the culture around that place impacted the work that you've then done and grown with?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I don't think Bridges would be Bridges if it wasn't the fact that it was born out of Langer, which is a small township in Cape Town, somewhere that people generally would kind of fear to go to in a sense, but it's so full of rich history and culture, and obviously music. South African music, obviously over the last 5-6 years, has absolutely exploded. Everybody knows what Amapiano and obviously Afro House, and it's huge. So certainly coming from a small community, and a community that has its challenges as well as its immense beauty, richness and creativity has been absolutely fundamental to what Bridges has become and how it has attracted so many people to it, if that answers your question.
It does. I thought it was interesting you said they're not students, they're co-creators, and I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit. Are you looking to kind of nurture the next generation of artists and stars? Is that the core mission? I mean,
it's not the core mission. Of course, it's part of the mission, but it's not about necessarily the next black coffee coming out of Bridges for Music. Of course, we're supporting and nurturing talent, but it's not just about, headlining in Glastonbury. It's about music as a vehicle, and I agree with everything you said. The fact that music binds us, it's what makes us human, it's why we all love music, we're all vibrational beings. It's science. That's fundamentally, that's why we're all connected to music and vibration. So it's about, yes, it's the practical side of it and the skill side of it, but it also goes beyond that, what music as a vehicle can do in terms of creating holy, wonderful human beings that can go out into the world and do amazing things and co-create. So that's why they're not students, they're co-creators.
And Rachel, welcome to the conversation. I
Hello.
think what's super interesting about RA is you perhaps have the biggest audience, if that's fair to say, in terms of who you reach. And I think, how does that... We talked a lot about narratives and the stories that are being told on stage. How, when there's so much going on, how do you, RA, decide what to report on and reflect on and feed back to the audience?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what Carrie is saying about this idea of like the co-creator, because I guess for me personally, on an editorial team, I guess one of the most important things is trying to keep it as like diverse as possible in terms of the people who are making the decisions. So having people that have completely, different lived experiences, but I guess a kind of like universal like love of music. That's a big thing for me. I guess, me as an editor, I guess what I bring to the table is that I'm not from here. I moved here when I was 18. I'm originally from Venezuela, so I kind of have a different perspective on what electronic music even means. To me, electronic music isn't techno, it's dembow, right? And that's in itself is a form of electronic music that maybe isn't recognized as such, etc. So it's a lot about having diversity of perspective. But I guess going back to what Kerry said about, this idea of like the co-creator, I guess, as a media platform and as an editor, I like to see, I guess, our audience and the artists that we cover and like just the artistic community in general as, I guess, like co-writers of the publication. I think the way that like media has changed over the last, 25 years, 30 years, the role of the magazine, used to be a kind of this like place of authority. People looked up at it as a figure of authority, and while that's still the case in terms of like having an authoritative voice on like music that comes out, etc., or like I guess like identifying scenes and movements, I think our role has changed slightly in terms of we're more of a platform now. We're more of, I guess, like a launch pad is the way I like to see it. There's no such thing as objective truth. It's everyone has a different idea of what truth is. So I think it's, as an editor, I've been doing this for like 10 years now, and even just seeing how it's changed in the past decade is, I think, just us as an industry, we have to shift our perspective basically and just be more humble and just let other people in and kind of treat every voice with kind of like the same like power and authority that people look to us as.
I think the really interesting thing about RA, is, as well as the editorial component, it's also listings, and I spend as much time on the gig pages essentially as I do the editorial, like, oh, what's playing in Prague and what's happening. Oh, this person's got this party. What does the artwork look like? What's the lineup looking like? Is it equitable? Have I heard of these names before? And that gives you a real sense of temperature, I guess, in the room of dance music. Is that when you talk about the creator side, it's on the listings page. You can see what the promoters are putting on and who they're showcasing.
Yeah, and the obviously I work on editorial, so not so much on like the kind of like the listing platform. But one thing that is relevant to what you're just saying now in terms of the listings is that it's promoters like upload it. Obviously, we have guardrails on what goes up in terms of events that aren't hateful, that are appropriate. That are safe, etc., that represent the kind of like core values of dance music, etc. But it is actually almost just like a forum. Like it's quite self-sustainable. Promoters and anyone who wants to throw a party can just go and upload an event on RA. So I think it represents. It's a quite like apt and like it kind of flattens the hierarchy of who can put events on and who gets to promote events, right? Mm-hmm. Just not just on the ground, but on the internet or like in like the media, I guess.
I think this is kind of at the heart of why the organizations on stage are so important, because electronic music means different things depending on who you speak to and your own experiences, your age, where you're from. All of that is quite, open to interpretation. And even as an association, the Association for Electronic Music, well, what does that mean if your genre or your lived experience of dance music is completely different? And so what do we work on? We can't possibly facilitate every lived experience. So we try and look at the systemic things that help people sustain careers in music. And I think that I find a kind of a through line through all of the organizations on the stages that you're looking at the next generation. And Kathy, perhaps you can speak to the stage after funding? Like once you've secured the income from the infrastructure of the industry, where do you then allocate it, and how do you decide on that focal point where you think, oh, there is a tipping point of audience attention on this collective or this artist or this label?
Sorry, I was away thinking about listings. I used to work for Time Out, so I've got an obsession about listings and their role in life, because, you know, that was the internet before the internet, wasn't it? Time Out magazine. Sorry, I was just down that rabbit hole, completely enjoying it. In the joy of listings, I love it. In terms of the funding, yes, so I've completely lost the plot.
I guess
Is it, you want to know how we fund, how we decide what we fund, or the relationship between the artist and the funding?
The creative side of, once you have the funding, what next, and where you allocate it, and the art that you help kind of facilitate to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual funding, we fund into a number of sort of climate and nature action areas, and that gives all the artists we work with a bit of an opportunity to think about sort of either advocating for particular partners that we are then funding. I think Sounds Right is an incredibly helpful example of the relationship between the art and the funding. So just yesterday, we launched 14 new tracks in advance of COP of working with Sub-Saharan African and Latin American artists. The Latin American artists all made music using sounds of the Amazon basin. The African artists all made music using sounds of the Congo basin. And we have already committed funding, and then we will direct the royalties from those tracks to funding. We've announced 4 projects in conservation projects in the Congo basin and 2 in the Amazon basin, and we always fund indigenous and community-led work. But that relationship for an artist between, I'm bringing the sounds of a place into a creative output, and that work is directly returning funding to preservation and restoration of that place, which may be the place they come from or a place they connect to, I think is a very beautiful example of sort of how you can really square a circle of that relationship between art, long-term funding, and actual impact for the world. I could say much more, but I'm sorry I've used too much of your time.
No, it's okay. It's good, but I think it's a very interesting point about the funding being almost circular, going back into the indigenous areas of that. And Kerry, I suppose that sort of almost mirrors what Bridges is doing as well. The money goes back into the local communities. And could you speak a little bit about, outside of the music education, maybe perhaps like the health and well-being, like what side of that do Bridges look at?
Yeah, there's a few points I'd like to quickly answer on there. So yes, of course, we are, it's predominantly set up to support young people in, the sort of in Langer and the surrounding sort of areas. However, now we're looking at, because it's so successful in the combination of the curriculum of the sort of hard skills and the soft skills, that actually we're taking piloting bridges in other places in Africa, like Mozambique and Kenya, and we also have students that come from other parts of the world, so from America, to learn, how we do things and then take it out. Sorry, I'm going to wrap it up. So what was the nub of the question?
The health and well-being of the co-creators.
I mean, it's critical. It's part of, as I said at the beginning, it is absolutely critical to the success of the co-creatives themselves and the success of the academy and the schooling, because without that well-being baked in to the curriculum, it just wouldn't be. I mean, I think most of us, just wouldn't know what the important or the difference is when we found a well-being practice of how it was, how we were before in our sort of day-to-day lives. So that's, of course, that's going to have an impact on the success of them moving forward and out of the environment.
We've got 1 minute left, and I don't have the confidence to do a collective hum in the centre of the room. Even though I loved it,
brilliant.
Don't feel I've got the same chops to pull it off. So I want to do one last open question, very short. Does anyone feel confident and optimistic, crucially, about the shape of culture? Because I think there's sometimes a lot of negative narrative. Is anyone excited about culture changing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, why not?
What, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Culture has to
Totally.
shift and change. I mean, that is part of being human. It's part of a living experience, right? Yes, there's some shit, but there's a lot good. We have to think optimistically, otherwise what's the point?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the only way that we can step away from the shit, which is always coming right at us is by acting from the grassroots community level, not from the top down, and acting, get on and do something. If you see the need for change, get on with it.
Love that. Round of applause.
And
Last word, I'd like to... Sorry, Kathy.
well, I was just going to say, tech will not save us, but culture will.
Amen.
There's one thing that I want to say, sorry, really quickly. There's a South African, it's called Ubuntu. I don't know if anybody knows this word. So we have a stage called Ubuntu, and essentially it means I am you because you are me. So basically, without each other, we're nothing.
Emma, could you please introduce the next film we'll be watching today?
Yeah, I don't normally read from a piece of paper, but it's such an incredible piece of work, I have to limit myself. So we're about to watch a snippet from a piece of work called Takuk. This word means listen, or listen carefully, or profoundly, it means listen and pay attention. Here, it refers to an audiovisual installation and soundtrack sharing stories of indigenous life, culture, and climate change in the Arctic. It's an immersive installation from Bicep, visual artist Zach Norman and filmmaker Charlie Miller that explores the lives, communities, and challenges facing artists indigenous to the Arctic region. Takuk is created in partnership with In Place of War, and it's part of our Earth Sonic program.